Okay. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We have an excellent panel discussing a very important topic to a lot of buildings in New York City, looking to comply with Local Law 97, of course, the future of oil heating. This presentation is going to be recorded. A slide deck and a link to a copy of the presentation will be sent out afterwards. If you miss something, no worries. I would kindly ask during the presentation, if you are coming in, to please mute your microphone so that there aren't distractions. And let's begin. So the agenda today, we're going to do some brief introductions of our panelists. We'll get into the future of oil heating in New York City. We'll talk about Local Law 97. Additionally, there are some important rule updates that we've covered a couple of times, but really important to really kind of hit home and go over again. Some case studies, and then we'll end with a Q&A. The contact information also for the presenters will be on the final slide. So you'll have a chance to screen capture that or write it down and reach out for any questions afterwards. So a little bit about Building Efficiency Services. My name is Ari, I'm a VP. We are in business now for about 17 years. Our specialty is helping high-rise multifamily and commercial buildings achieve energy efficiency, reduce their carbon emissions, steam system upgrades and retrofits. And we've done we're proud of, we've done a lot of buildings in New York City, serviced a lot of radiators and saved over 3 million therms. We're participating contractors with all the utilities and a recipient of the New York City Accelerator Innovator Award. Joining us today is Approved Oil. They've been in business now for close to 100 years, over 90 years. We work with the Approved Oil team, really phenomenal guys, very knowledgeable about everything oil, the delivery, the infrastructure, maintenance. We work with Jeff in particular, superstar at Approved Oil, and really great guys to reach out to. And over at New York City Accelerator, we have Marissa Morris. We've been doing a number of presentations with Marissa, and really phenomenal account manager, an excellent resource for anything Local Law 97. We'll have the contact information at the end. So let's get into oil heating. I'm going to call up the guys from Approved Oil, and please take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Sutherland, head of sales for Approved Oil. I'm joined with Jeff Cohen, who you just gave some nice compliments about. Jeff is responsible for the head of the mechanical division. So all things boilers, burners, service, and installation. Jeff will talk about today as part of the presentation. Before I get started, just a quick thing about Approved. As you mentioned, we are probably one of the largest fuel oil distributor and energy providers in the tri-state area. We've been around since 1932. We're going into our 92nd year in business. So tremendous staying power. Again, what we offer: fuel oil, biofuel, diesel, natural gas, electricity. We're a large company, probably the largest fleet of company-owned trucks that deliver all our oil to all our customers throughout the tri-state area. Tremendous amount of assets in terms of over 100 trained union technicians providing service 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So we have all of the information, all of the education that we can provide all of our customers to kind of get them through this challenging times. And when I say these challenging times, we're really in this energy transition right now. And I define that as how the world is starting to move away from fossil fuels to cleaner, greener energy. Right? And it really aligns well with what New York State has stated through their Climate Act. Right? They want to reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2040. They want to reduce it by 85% by 2050, as measured from 1990 levels. It's a very aggressive goal, but they also have very aggressive goals in achieving this. They have come out publicly that said they want all of the electricity generated in New York to be come from 70% renewables by the year 2030. Extremely aggressive goals, and a lot has to happen. And this is what's causing this trickle down effect now that's happening to building owners and property managers, because they're having to deal with this, right? You see what's going on with local law 97, that is all about using less carbon intense fuels and less of it through energy efficiency measures. So it's a very big task. There's a lot of complex things that are going on. Building owners and property managers are reaching out, looking for experts to kind of guide them through this and what they have to do and at what time they have to do it by. So today, what we wanted to talk about is a couple of things. And first and foremost is those buildings that are on number 4 oil. All right, if you go to the next slide. So those buildings that are on number 4 oil, it's very important to understand some key dates. It's being banned. You can no longer use 4 oil after July 1st of 2027. Now, even that's 3 years out, but there's a couple of things that are happening. All these buildings that have boilers that need to file for a triennial permit, which is a certificate of operation of your boiler and permitting. If you're a 4 oil building and that triennial permit comes up after June 30th, you will not be issued that permit. That means you have to do something, right, to get off of 4 oil prior to that. If your permit comes due, let's say June 25th, technically you can renew it, right? And you'd be good through July 1st of 2027. But after July 1st of 2027, you have to be off it, all right? But even still, if you're a 4 oil building, all right, and when you start to now file for your local law 97 related activity, if for some reason you're above the emission guidelines, you're going to have to do something potentially sooner than 2027. So these are the things that you have to be concerned about. Now, June 2024 is for permitting purposes. If you're not in the New York City owned building, you're okay until 2027. If you're a New York City owned building, you cannot burn 4 oil beyond July 1st of 2025. All right. So if we go to the next slide, right, as fuel oil buildings, whether you're a 4 oil or a 2 oil or a dual fuel, you have options. You don't have to convert to or go to electrification right now. There's plenty of options that are here for buildings that are currently burning oil. Right now, the city has mandated, beginning in October of 2017, that all fuel oil that's being supplied in New York City had to be at least a minimum of 5% blend of biofuel. So that has been going on for the last 6-7 years, right? Starting in July of 2022, all of New York State has to be supplied 5% blend, right? Governor Hochul signed in December of 22 that all New York, beginning in 2025, July of 2025, will be at 10% biofuel blend. All right. And then by 2030, everything will be going to 20% blend. So these are the state guidelines, the state mandates that are happening today. And biofuel, right, and the complexities or the complexions of biofuel provide a lot of good benefits in terms of less carbon intensity. And these are options that we can kind of go to as building owners and property managers. And I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, because he sees this every day with all the buildings. In 2023, we probably did somewhere between 400 and 500 either boiler conversions or fuel upgrades, to buildings that imply. So it is something that we see every day, right? We have a very good experience with this, and we see a lot of different questions that come up, with building owners, and we're trying to guide them through. in trying to get them below the mandates for 2030 and a much affordable solution. And biofuel, I believe, is going to play a big part in meeting those state mandates. So, Jeff.
Thank you, John. So I go back to the days of, I guess, 2012 and 2010 when we outlawed 6-oil in New York City. And the oil industry itself has done a really good job of cleaning up our act. My father always said to me, he says, the oil industry has 10 years left. And he's been telling me that since 1985, but we've come a long way. Back in 2015, we've changed the product makeup of fuel oil from 500 parts per million sulfur down to about 15 parts per million sulfur, and created a cleaner diesel and heating oil product that's available. So it's taken a lot of the iron and steel out of the industry, and it's done its job in terms of cleaning up the environment. Where asthma, there were certain areas of New York City that had very high asthma rates and smog conditions, and this just change in fuel oil has just improved that. Biofuel is a heat blended product. So back in 2017, when the first biofuel was trucked into New York City, we were able to heat blend it with heating oil and create those early biofuel products. That product has come a long way too now, and you can see that it's a clean product. And as John was saying earlier, the state mandate is 5%. We can now deliver up to a 20% blend to customers. The customers, by using it, aren't seeing any real increase in costs between a B5 blend and a B20 blend. And what ends up happening with that is there's a rebate that comes along. So if you look at the second bullet point, by changing your biofuel blend to 20%, you get a 20-cent per gallon tax rebate from New York State. Doesn't require any upgrades or any changes to your system if you're already on number 2 oil. The other thing you can do is convert your system to a dual fuel system where natural gas is your primary fuel. And we do hundreds of those a year. So basically you're left with 3 options. You can go from number 4 oil to biofuel, number 2 oil to biofuel, or either a fuel grade and go to dual fuel and burn natural gas. If you want to change the slide, that would be fine. So biofuel comes from renewable products. Most of the products you see today are either soy or plant-based products from the Midwest. They're rail car shipped to our terminal in the Bronx, where they're heat blended, put into our 25 million gallons of storage, and sold to, as a wholesaler, we sell to other fuel oil dealers, and we sell to our own retail customers as well. As far as the efficiency of it, it's a little less efficient than your typical fossil fuel products, but the cost is the same and it's cleaner. So it acts as an emulsifier, and what it does is it actually cleans a lot of the debris and sludge that's in the bottom of your tank, and it pushes it through your system. So you end up with a cleaner fuel oil tank structure. So the benefits of switching to biofuel has a lower carbon emission. There's really no modifications to your burner or to your oil tank. There's no need to purchase any new equipment in that case. You get the same comfort as regular heating oil, and it performs better than most cases than conventional heating oil because it's got less impurities in the system. And it meets all of the engineering and ASTM standards that are operating within the state and the United States right now. So that's basically the situation there. If you want to change the slide, Ari, I'll go to the next one. So people often ask, well, I got to change from number 4 oil to number 2 oil. What are the costs involved in that? So basically, the cost could be anywhere from $10,000 to $18,000. And the reason for the difference is what actually has to happen to the tank. And I'll discuss that in a couple minutes on the next slide. There'll be a carbon emission improvement of right now between 14 and up to 18% in terms of your carbon emissions reduction. So that will help your local law 97 score. Also, my concern is as fewer properties begin to burn number 4 oil, we're going to start seeing an increase in the cost, the same way that happened to number 6 oil, which became a boutique blend when a lot of the buildings changed to number 4 and number 2. And as I said earlier, there's no difference in the cost between using a B6 blend and a B20 blend for biofuel. The only difference is the tax rebate. Obviously, with B6, there's a 6-cent per gallon tax credit. With the B20, there's a 20-cent per gallon tax credit that's in place. And you can still upgrade to natural gas. The utilities can still bring you in a new service at no cost, but rumor has it that that's going to be changing soon. So let's change the slide and we will go through what's needed for a fuel grade change. So the first thing we do is we file with the Department of Buildings for the actual fuel grade change. And we can self-certify the results. We also need to file an amendment with the Department of Air Resources as well as New York State for the materials that are inside of your oil tank. We inspect the oil tank to make sure you're properly contained. Either the tank is going to be vaulted, which means it's wrapped in concrete, or it's in an oil tank room. And if it's an oil tank room, you're going to have to epoxy paint or line the protective walls of the tank just to make sure that oil doesn't leak out. They're going to pump out all the product from the tank. They'll squeegee clean out the remaining fuel that's in the bottom of the tank. They'll reseal the manhole cover. When they're done with that, they'll perform a tightness test to make sure the tank is not leaking. They'll install a DEC kit to show your fuel is now burning number 2 oil. You'll get the written results of the test within 24 hours of the results. You'll know if you passed or not. And we'll perform the necessary burner work, which is nothing more than plating off the preheater, probably doing some adjustments to the burner, cleaning the nozzle, and then we sign off the project. But if anyone's interested in getting this done, it's going to be a very busy summer for that. We have a lot of people already signed up to do fuel grade changes to number 2 and eventually to go to gas. You can change the slide, Ari. Now, a lot of people ask me about oil to gas conversions, where we're pretty much, we don't want to remove the oil tank unless it's absolutely necessary because of the terrible thing that goes on in the city where gas gets shut down. I don't know how many of you have witnessed that, but it's not a fun thing. So at least if you have an oil tank in the building, you can burn heating oil as an alternative while the gas leak gets fixed, and you can start up the system. So the first thing we always do is we do a walkthrough and we open a case with the utility to do the conversion. There's always some paperwork involved, but it's fairly innocuous. Once the service determination is made by the utility, we will then work on installing a new gas line and a meter station. In many cases, if your boiler is old, normally more than 25 years old, we'll suggest that you upgrade the boiler. Same thing for the burner. We have some much older systems where people have liked to just add gas to those boilers, and we find the utility gives us a very tough time. It really gives the customer a tough time of doing that because of the amount of deterioration of the steel that's in some of the boilers, even the older ones. The chimney will require a brand new steel lining. That's an expensive part of the project, but it's a necessity. Most terracotta liners are not in good enough shape, and they will not pass the necessary smoke test to be able to operate without putting in a steel liner. We normally bring in one of our professional engineers to obtain the permits and update the records with all the city and state agencies. The good news is right now there are rebates available from both utilities that we manage the project for you. The rebates are usually anywhere from $2 to $5 per million BTUs. If you want to do a custom high efficiency project, those rebates are a little bit more. The good news is we also have financing available through Con Ed and National Grid. And some of those rates, especially in Con Ed, are well below market rate. They could be as low as 0 money down and 4% for 60 to 72 months. So basically what you're doing is you're paying through this conversion through savings. And the savings annually, if you do the full conversion, could be anywhere from 25 to 40%. And that's it. So now, John, I'll turn it back to you as far as biodiesel and how it can help and where the emissions fall out on these.
Sure. Just to kind of recap with what Jeff said, though, certainly FLORA is going away and customers have to do something about that, right? And they can easily go to a fuel grade upchange by going to 2 oil and then purchase a blend of either a B10 or a B20 and at roughly the same price that they're buying today, but you would get that tax rebate on the back end. So you can get up to a 20-cent tax rebate if you go to a B20, and it'll certainly help, that building meet whatever local law 97 mandates or guidelines they have that are posted for for the year 2030. Or you can kind of go the more expensive route right now, which would be a dual fuel opportunity where gas is the primary fuel, right? And oil is the backup. But I just want to say one thing is you can do that. But if you go to B20 blend, so if you're on 2 oil today and you go to a B20 blend, that B20 blend is 8% less carbon intensity than natural gas. All right. So you might not have to do a complete, capital project, which could cost you $350,000, $400,000 to put in new boilers, burners, and everything, bring the gas main in and so forth. You might just you might be able just to get away with just going to a B20 blend, less costly in terms of the capital cost, right? And just as efficient as anything else, but really no equipment upgrade. So I think that is certainly what we want to kind of stress right now. This biodiesel is definitely an option, and it's an affordable option for buildings, certainly to meet whatever 2030 guidelines that the state and the city have put out there for local law 97. And this basically, again, is just a slide to illustrate what B20 is compared to just straight heating oil, fossil fuels. So straight heating oil doesn't have a B5 blend in it. But if you take a B20 to just let's say a traditional gallon of oil, it'll be 14.6%. But when you compare it to currently what they have right now, it's blended with a B5 versus natural gas. So this technology, right, is going to continue to improve over time. The oil industry, as well as manufacturers, boiler manufacturers and burner manufacturers, are already testing B50 and B100 blends. So I think my advice to building owners today is take advantage of the technology that we have today before you start to move in a direction where you're spending potentially millions of dollars that you might want to go to in terms of electrifying a building. I think it's too early in the game. There's a lot of things that happen. Right now, most people are looking, how do we get to 2030 and what do we need to do in 2030 and what's the most affordable way to get there? And I think what Jeff laid out today is definitely affordable, real options that customers can act on. So with that, I'll turn it over back to you, Ari.
Thank you very much, guys. Really great presentation. And I would just also comment something that I think Jeff said, that it's going to be a very busy summer. The deadlines for local law 97, they've kind of snuck up on us, and now we're in it in 2024. The work should be done by the end of the year and filing in 2025. So we're feeling that as well as contractors helping buildings with their efficiency. Better to get on it sooner than later. Reach out to Jeff and John. They'll be able to kind of help you decide on your next steps, but better not to wait on it. So let's go on to now local law 97. I'm going to call on Marissa, please, from Accelerator. Really phenomenal resource for local law 97. Go ahead, Marissa.
Yeah, thanks, Ari. Hi, everyone. My name is Marissa Morris. I'm an account manager with the New York City Accelerator program. Just a little bit of background on our program. We're a completely free advisory service through the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. We work with thousands of buildings across the 5 boroughs to build a cleaner future by lowering pollution and reducing carbon emissions. Any building over 5,000 square feet can work with us, new or existing. And smaller buildings, if you have those in your portfolio or you work with smaller buildings, we can refer those to our partner organizations and other programs that you might have available to you. How does it work? You just reach out to us, you get connected with a dedicated account manager like myself, and you receive objective advice customized to your needs. And then what's the cost and what's the catch? There's absolutely no catch or cost or sign up or commitment. If you need to access one question or you need some help with project management, we can help you in any way that you need. So feel free to scan the QR code or send me an email if you have some more questions after this. But I'm here to talk a little bit more about Local 97. But before hopping into that, we kind of have to see where we are as a city. And in New York, we're in a very unique position where nearly 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings, and 90% of these buildings are still going to be here by 2050. So if we're looking at lowering our greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050, and there's a very ambitious reduction of 80% by 2050, we have to look at retrofitting these existing buildings, as most of them will still be here by that date. Next slide, please. Thank you. So income, the Climate Mobilization Act. This was passed in 2019. It is the largest climate solution put forth by any city in the world, and it consists of many different local laws. This includes, and it's a legislative package to limit emissions on buildings over 25,000 square feet. So this includes Local Law 92 and 94. These set the green roof and solar PV mandates. Local Law 33 and 95, and this establishes energy efficiency grades in our city. Local Law 96, which establishes PACE clean energy financing, and the backbone of the Climate Mobilization Act, Local Law 97, which we'll talk in way more depth today, which sets carbon emissions intensity limits for buildings over 25,000 square feet. So as a quick overview, as I said, Local Law 97 it sets carbon emission limits for buildings over 25,000 square feet. It's broken down into two main articles. There's Article 320, which outlines emission limits for different occupancy types. So starting this year in 2024, with increasingly stringent carbon caps every 5 years through 2050. Specifically, affordable housing under Article 320 has some different requirements, and I'll talk about that in a later slide. There's also Article 321. This establishes an alternative pathway for certain types of affordable housing, providing the choice of the prescriptive pathway or meeting the 2030 limits by 2024, so by the end of this year. Two really important links that I want to highlight, and when you receive the slideshow afterwards, you can definitely take a look. Local Law 97 guidance for affordable housing on HPD's website is a great place to start if you have no idea where to begin. And the Local Law 97 covered building list. If you're not sure if your building is subject to Local Law 97, I highly suggest this being the first place you take a look. See if your building is on this list, and if it is, then feel free to reach out to the Accelerator program, and we'll be able to give you the next steps for your building to comply with Local Law 97. So as a quick overview of affordable housing under this law and how the different articles could apply to your building, this Article 320 and 321 are broken down even further for affordable housing. Some important things to note, and I'll go through this chart in a second, but in 2022, DOB released a first rule package that provided some more clarity to owners. And then in 2023, DOB released a second package of rules, which includes Article 321 penalties and penalty mitigation opportunities for both articles, Article 320 and 321. So if you are interested in more information on those penalties, penalty mitigation opportunities, and how your building might be able to take advantage of those mitigation opportunities, definitely reach out and we'll be able to give you some more guidance. So this is a breakdown of the chart on the first slide. What I want to highlight here is which buildings apply to Article 321 and versus Article 320. So Article 321, the prescriptive pathway, this applies to buildings with more than 35% rent regulated units, HDFC co-ops, buildings with one or more units with federal project-based funding, so that's like Section 8, 202, 811, and NYCHA Pact and RAD buildings. Under Article 320, but subject to delayed compliance, buildings with at least one rent regulated unit, but up to 35%, they would comply under Article 320, but they have a delayed compliance until 2026, so that would be their first year of compliance. And then for Mitchell Llama rentals and co-ops with no federal project-based funding, and for buildings that have no rent regulating units, but at least one income restricted unit, they would comply under Article 320, but they have a delayed compliance until 2035. So if you think any of your buildings fall in those two pathways, of course, again, I can't reiterate it enough. Still reach out, even though you have a delayed compliance, you definitely need to start planning now. Next slide, please. So this is Article 321 in a little bit more detail, and we'll go through this row really quickly. So as I mentioned, the different housing types that fall under this are those different types of affordable housing. The compliance requirement for Article 321, you either need to comply with 2030 limits starting in by the end of 2024, excuse me, or implement all the applicable prescriptive energy conservation measures by the end of this year. For affordable housing, this is the important distinction. This is a one-time compliance report that needs to be filed May of next year. So it is a one-time compliance. You don't have to meet those subsequent limits up to 2050. And the penalties set for affordable housing are failure to report is $10,000 and failure to comply is $10,000. The penalty mitigation opportunities under this article are if there's an unexpected event or if you have an eligible energy conservation project, and that's for certain HPD projects. And there's a mediated resolution specifically set for Article 321. And if you need some more information, of course, I can provide that for you as well. To go in depth a little bit more on those two affordable housing designations under Article 320. So the 2026 pathway, those buildings that don't meet that 35% rent regulating unit, you would comply under Article 320. So that's meeting the yearly greenhouse gas emission limits. And your first annual report will be due May 1st of 2027. So you have that delayed compliance until 2027. For the 2035 pathway, it's similar. You would comply under Article 320, meeting those yearly limits, but starting in 2036. That would be your first annual report. The penalties for this article is the same as market rate multifamily buildings. So failure to report is your floor area times 50 cents per month, and failure to comply is $268 per ton of carbon, over the limit per year. There is some penalty mitigation opportunities set up for the 2026 pathway that includes unexpected events and what they define as good faith efforts. For the 2035 pathway, if you have buildings that fall under there, the DLB should release some more guidance on the penalty mitigation opportunities for that pathway. Some things I want to highlight for these two groups of buildings: 50% of buildings subject to Local 97 don't already meet the 2030 limits, and 75% of buildings don't meet the 2035 limits. So, although you have this delayed compliance, it's super important to make sure that you already have a plan in place to figure out how you're going to get your greenhouse gas emissions lowered. And, by 2040, we expect most buildings will probably need to be electric, partially electric. And by 2050, buildings need to be carbon neutral to avoid steep penalties. So, as I said, we're in 2024, but it's super important to start planning. This is that entire timeline that I just mentioned, but at a glance. Super important dates to take a look at is 2024. That's when emission limits begin and the Article 321 compliance deadline. The 2026 pathway, of course, is coming up, and that's when you would start your yearly reports. And then that 2035 pathway, your reports will start in 2036. So it's super important to take a look at your greenhouse gas emissions and see how you should plan to start lowering them. So under Article 321, I mentioned those two pathways. There's a little bit more in depth of those two pathways. So you either have to show that you're under your 2030 limits. So we would use your local law 84 benchmarking data to determine your emissions. And then by May of 2025, submitting a report to DOB certifying that for the calendar year of 2024, you are under the emission limits. Or you have the option of applying the prescriptive energy conservation measures by 2024. You would implement all the applicable measures by the end of this year, and then by May of 2025, submitting a report to DOB by a retro commissioning agent that all those 13 prescriptive measures have been installed at your building. This is a list of those 13 prescriptive measures. They're broken down here under some general measures, ones that are specific to steam systems, and maintenance measures. For the interest of time, I won't go through every single one of them, but this is where you should start if you're under Article 321 and you're pretty far away from those 2030 limits. I highly suggest taking a look at this list, going through your building, see what has or what hasn't been done, and what still needs to be implemented in your building. Of course, these are just for for what applies to your building. So if you have a hydronic boiler, of course, those steam system ones wouldn't apply to you. And those maintenance ones are good maintenance practices. So just making sure that your system's in good working order. One thing I want to highlight here is the ones that have a check mark above them are ones that can be incentivized through different programs. So there is some money out there to help get you get you in compliance with Local Law 97. So reach out to us and we'll be able to help you. What I want to highlight under Article 320, those greenhouse gas emission limits, for buildings under Article 321 that are looking to possibly do that are, excuse me, are performing close to your emission limits, or you're planning deep retrofits like a oil to gas conversion or electrification, we definitely would suggest going for that 2030 pathway, as your greenhouse gas emissions would lower enough to be under that 2030 limit, and therefore you'd be in compliance. So the plan of action here is determining your building performance in relation to emission limits, creating a building energy efficiency plan, and then choosing projects to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions to meet those limits. And that's what has already been highlighted, but it's super, super important, is that number 4 oil phase out that is beginning this year. So if your building is currently on number 4 oil, we definitely suggest, of course, reaching out to our program and getting in touch with contractors like BES, like Approved Oil, to come up with a plan that works best for your building. Of course, fuel switching, switching to number 2 oil, a oil blend that's already been discussed in the presentation, oil to gas conversions or electrification, any of those things that you want to explore, we can definitely help you. So, and here there'll be a link to more information on Local Law 32 and how in relation to Local Law 97, it is super important. So make sure you take a look at that if you're on number 4 oil currently. And just to highlight how our program helps, you can get in touch with us. We would clarify the Local Law 97 requirements for your building, identify those greenhouse gas emissions and compare it to the limits, and then determine which pathway is best for you. If you have an affordable housing building that falls under Article 321, we can suggest either meeting the greenhouse gas emission limits or implementing the prescriptive measures. Then also help identify applicable financing and incentive programs and assemble a team of service providers, and then provide project management support through project completion. So however much help you'll need, we're here to just be an asset to you and your project. But with that, I know it's a lot of information. I'm going to pass it back over. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Happy to answer them at the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Marissa. Now, I do want to make sure that we're going to leave time for questions at the end of this, so I'm going to kind of speed up a little bit. And if you have any questions, please ping us at the end. I'm just, in this particular slide, we reached out to Department of Buildings. Very good to know that this particular email address, ghgmissions@buildings.nyc.gov, is a definitive legal answer on any questions you have. It does take a little while to get a response from them. Our time is, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, so be patient with them, but it's important. If you have any questions, you can reach out to them to get a definitive answer. Great resource to have. We had some questions when the new rules dropped in December, and some of the language wasn't super clear to us, maybe initially in the rules, and that had to do with radiant barriers and TRVs. And you can see from the response we get directly back from the Department of Buildings that in a one-pipe steam system, they are not required, which is a big relief to a lot of, I would say, smaller to mid-sized buildings. With the exception if you're experiencing units that are complaining about, radiators that are not functioning, overheating, then in those particular units, it would be required. And once TRVs are not required, radiant barriers to go together with them. The language we actually got back from the DOB was once you are, this is what I've heard, once you are going into the radiator, they want to usually do radiant barriers, but if you're not going into the radiator, it's not going to be a requirement. So like for hydronic radiators, usually you're not going to be responsible to put in radiant barriers there as well. Another big question we had, and we get a lot from buildings, is if a building is really considering what their options are, and they know that there is a fine of $10,000 for not filing and another $10,000 for not fulfilling the Article 321 pathway, maybe their low cost option is just accepting the $20,000 penalty and being done with it. And we asked the DOB very clearly about this, and what they came back and said is that this is not necessarily a one-time fine. So they reserve the right and discretion to issue recurring penalties for non-compliance with the Article 321 and Local Law 97. So I would, every building has to decide what they need to do for themselves. Of course, every situation is different. We speak to all kinds of management and owners directly, but please keep that in mind as you're making those kinds of considerations. Some additional inquiries, temperature controls for hydronic systems. That's what we just mentioned. You do not need to add new controls. If they're there already, you need to make sure they're functioning. So radiant barriers does not need to be installed. These, by the way, came not from the DOB, but from New York City Accelerator. Do you need to take off radiator covers to install barriers if it's necessary to install barriers? Answer is yes, right? Once you're going in, you're going in. And what's the real number for 100% in unit? Part of the guidelines was to make sure that every single unit has these temperature controls. And, some units, we're in the business of helping buildings actually do the in-unit and common area work. And sometimes 100% is just not possible. And they're putting out further guidance on it, but I think the number now is maybe closer to 80%, but still you got to document which units you really did not have access to, how many attempts you made, et cetera. When the filing guide came out in January, I think Marissa had a link to it earlier. It's down there below as well. They basically, those answers we got from DOB were basically repeated verbatim in the filing guide. Just want to point out, even though TRVs are not required for one-pipe steam systems, they're still recommended for radiators that are close to the boiler where the pressure is higher, and to help kind of regulate the system. So maybe the first floor, second floor, or the areas closest to the boiler. Some case studies. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to kind of pick up the speed a little bit. Because so much of New York City's energy consumption is from its buildings, it also, of course, presents the greatest opportunity to save. Number of problems that we see very often in steam systems, varying hot and cold, clanging pipes, of course, high energy costs and tenant complaints. We offer, a complete, comprehensive, and holistic approach to steam system balancing, and of course, the full 13 measures that Marissa had up earlier to comply with Local Law 97 if you're an Article 321 building, and a lot of these measures will show up in that list as well for the 13 measures. One thing maybe I just would point out briefly is orifice plates. BES, Building Efficiency Services, we've done probably more orifice plate projects than, in New York City, where I have a lot of experience, very proficient at it, our engineering and our calculations. Orifice plates are basically an engineered disc that go onto the inlet side of the radiator. It regulates the amount of steam that is coming into the radiator, therefore eliminating the need for steam traps, which normally need to be maintained and replaced every 3 to 5 years. So that's a big operational cost and expense that is eliminated, and really goes a long way for that steam system balancing. Orifice plates are for 2-pipe steam systems, by the way, not 1 pipe, where a steam trap would normally be required. So I kind of put this one up here, a recent project we did, Queens Oil Fueled Affordable. This is a little bit on the smaller side of buildings we normally do, but maybe about mid-size, 53 units, 1-pipe steam pre-war building. Really nice. We dealt directly with the owner or the owner's daughter, really, really nice woman. Jackson Heights, they realized a 15% reduction in their operating expenses and saved over 3,100 gallons of oil in their savings. So this is a great way to really kind of stack the efficiency together with approved oil, right? So they have excellent solutions to kind of phase out number 4 and increase your efficiency. And then with making sure that your distribution system in the building is operating efficiently, it's a great way to reduce your carbon emissions and really stack your efficiency. Another project we recently did, we were just proud to be awarded this project. It's a landmark church in New York City. We surveyed and repaired all common area steam traps. An interesting thing to note here is that houses of worship are considered Article 321. So they would also be eligible for the 13 measures to comply with local law 97. Okay, so now we still have some time, 12 minutes. We can open it up for some Q&A from the audience. And I'm going to also put up the contact information so you can screen capture that, please. And have a way to reach out afterwards. The presentation has been recorded. We'll send out a copy of the slide deck and a link to the recording. Let's go through first maybe the chat over here and see if we can find any questions. So we have a question from Allison. Hey, Allison, we are already dual fuel and have only been burning natural gas, but we have a tank full of number 4 oil. Is there anything we can do with the number 4 when we pump it out? That's a question for you guys, Jeff and John.
Well, technically, if it's in the tank already, it's considered hazardous material. So the tank actually has to get pumped out and really put out of service if they're not using the oil. And there is a cost involved in that because there's only one terminal in the city that actually takes the oil, and they charge us almost $2 a gallon to receive the oil. So
Okay,
they would have
thank you.
tank pumped, cleaned, and then put out of service. So there's an expense involved in that.
There's no resale.
Yeah, there's absolutely no resale value. There's actually a cost to it because it's considered a hazardous material.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Question from Aggie. Will we receive a copy of the presentation? Yes, absolutely. We'll work on getting it out shortly afterwards. And from Elliot, if a building is covered under Article 321, can they file a report but just pay the $10,000 fine for not installing the prescriptive measures? This seems like a far cheaper option. Okay, Elliot, so that's a really question that we've been getting a lot, and we covered that in a slide, but maybe Marissa, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more as well.
Yeah, happy to. So as Ari mentioned on one of the past slides, it is a one-time compliance requirement for buildings under Article 321, but DOB, has the option and has the discretion to issue recurring fines for buildings out of compliance. So that's the answer that we've all received. So definitely, of course, always submit the report, and that is has been all of the account managers on the Accelerator program. That has been our suggestion. Make sure everyone gets a report in. There is penalty mitigation opportunities for the non-compliance side of Article 321. I didn't include it in the presentation, but if you have more questions, you can definitely reach out. But for the short of it, it is basically if you submit a construction plan showing that you're getting the prescriptive measures done and they'll be done by end of 2025, you can submit that with your report and they'll give you that extension. Or if you're working towards meeting the 2030 limits, you can also submit that plan and they can approve it that you would have till 2030 to meet those limits if you submit it with your report. That's kind of that's like the short answer. If you need a little bit more nuanced answers and you have specific situations for each of your buildings, I'm happy to take a look and let you know some more information.
Thank you, Marissa. So we have a question from Louise. Are buildings under 320 and 321 required to submit a decarbonization plan? You want to take that, Marissa?
Yeah, I can take that one as well. Buildings are not required to submit a decarbonization plan unless you are looking to comply under the good faith efforts that's been set up under Article 320 or the penalty mitigation opportunities under Article 321. So if there's for some reason that your building won't meet those greenhouse gas emission limits, you can submit a decarbonization plan to basically show, like, as I mentioned before, what your plans are to meet those limits in the future, and then DOB can accept that report in the decarbonization plan in lieu of the compliance requirement for your building.
Okay, so in other words, like sort of requesting an extension from the
Exactly.
deadlines Right. So you submit a decarbonization plan to show good faith effort that you're on the way to doing it to get that extension. Okay. Question from Brian. Just want to make sure that I understand correctly that none of this info, other than the approved presentation, is relevant for unaffordable housing buildings. Is that right? So thank you, Brian. So yes, first of all, that is kind of true. Of course, the approved oil guys are presenting information that's relevant to any oil field buildings. A lot of what Marissa discussed is specifically for Article 321. The reason is because there are a lot more details regarding 321 and the pathways and different ways they need to comply. 320 is a bit more straightforward. You need to meet your emissions limits and, of course, file your reporting. But if you have any questions, specifically for market rate buildings or Article 320, please reach out to myself or Marissa. We're happy to help you with any questions. Question from Shulam: will dual fuel be allowed beyond 2030? I guess, please, guys. Jeff, John?
I think so. As long, it all depends upon where they are in terms of meeting their emission limits, right? If they have done everything that they possibly can to lower their emissions, but yet they're still above the limit of whatever has been posted at that time, they might have to do something other than burn natural gas. And again, right now, either it's B20 or natural gas, which are the two fuels today that have the lowest carbon intensity factor associated with that, or they would have to start to think about some sort of electrification of that building going forward. But again, it all depends upon where that building is in terms of where they are with their emission limits.
And a lot of that stuff, a lot of that stuff be prescriptive work. Their pipes may be uninsulated. They may have fluorescent bulbs and not T8s in there. They may have windows that are open. They may not have an energy management system. So, these are the things that are easy to do, don't cost a lot of money, and it's all cumulative savings that the building's going to get.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys. A question from Brian. Are there any paths to installing a gas-fired domestic hot water system separate from our oil boiler so that we can turn off the boiler completely in the summer?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we're looking at a bunch of those projects now. The only real stumbling block that we've come across is the issue of the chimneys. If the building, let's say, is on gas already and the chimney is not steel lined, the chimney needs to be inspected and approved. And us as licensees, we need to sign off on the condition of the chimney. It may require a smoke test. If it's a terracotta chimney, it's got to be in good condition for us to be willing to sign off on a hot water heater. However, I will tell you, hot water heaters do present a significant savings, especially during times that the boiler isn't calling for heat. And you can run and you put in a more efficient system, either an 80% or an 85%, or even in some cases, if you have the venting, a 97% efficient water heating system.
Okay. And we have one last question right now in the, another one popped up, but we have from Dana. Can you please talk about the future of natural gas in New York City? Any thoughts on that, or?
My
Yeah.
personal opinion is that natural gas isn't going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere. Okay.
Neither is heating.
Okay. Marissa, you were going to say something on that?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that as of right now, I think that there hasn't been any mandates, right? There's no rules against or like any phase outs on the horizon. If your building is subject to local law 97 and it is market rate and under Article 320, you definitely have to look at lowering your greenhouse gas emissions regardless. So if you're on natural gas and you're over those emission limits, and I wanted to mention as well that although those prescriptive measures are just for affordable housing, that was a really great point that all of them are really good, like building maintenance practices, like pipe insulation, energy management systems. So if you've done everything that you can do and you're on natural gas and you're over your greenhouse gas emissions, then you may have to look at other options. But there is no like mandates or anything like that or rules against burning natural gas in the city.
Yeah, again, I would just again sum it up by the best way is making sure that you're using the least intensity, less carbon intensity fuel as you possibly can, and then try to do everything you can to make your building as efficient as possible, so you're using less of it, right? So pick the right fuel and then use less of it through your energy efficiency measures.
All right, thank you. We have a question from Margaret. Is renewable diesel a viable option?
Chris, you want to take that one?
Well, as of right now, renewable diesel is only being used on road in heavy duty fleets. There hasn't been an application yet for a heating source, but I'm confident that we will see that on the horizon. Hopefully within the next 18 to 24 months, we will see it used for heating source.
Okay.
But just like that,
Yes,
want to add one
go ahead.
about that diesel. You know, New York City has just issued a contract for 100% renewable diesel for the over 12,000 heavy-duty fleet vehicles, and approved is the supplier, which is the biggest contract on the East Coast for fleet people. So we're working closely with the city on meeting their goals too.
Okay. So someone actually pointed out in the chat that there were a couple of questions also in the Q&A section. So I'm pulling that up right now. I appreciate everyone. We're just coming up on the hour. We'll take these questions maybe, and we'll wrap it up. Question from Michael: can Article 321 buildings follow the more burdensome standard compliance? Well, first of all, I believe, Michael, that if you're in Article 321, you must file the 321 pathway. And you can, though, if you're meeting the 2030 limits, submit a report that you're meeting those limits. But I guess from our experience, the prescriptive pathway to implement the 13 measures, it's basically a one and done, and you can have at least at this point lifetime compliance with local law 97. To me, I mean, I would suggest Article 321 buildings do that pathway. But go ahead, Marissa, please. Maybe you can speak on that as well.
Yeah, so for Article 321 buildings, I mentioned there are those two pathways, so meeting the 2030 limits or doing the 13 prescriptive measures. If you fall under Article 321, you would comply under Article 321, because you wouldn't be on the Article 320 covered building list, so they would be looking for that one-time compliance report. I also assume, and feel free to like give me a little bit more information, but I assume that the more burdensome standard of compliance would just be, you mean the 2030 pathway, and you can absolutely comply under there if you'd rather do that. And I do think that, like, depending on the plan for your building, if you're planning like really large retrofits, but they're not going to be done by the end of this year, but they will have your building under the 2030 limits, definitely pursue that option instead. And you can submit that plan as your with your compliance report, and then have that time until 2030 to comply. But let me know if that answers your question. If it doesn't, I'm happy to connect off this call as well to kind of discuss your option specifically.
There was a question by Mark. Thank you, Marissa. Thank you. There was a question by Mark a little while ago, but this is for the approved oil guys. Does DOB recognize B20 in terms of reduction in GHG emissions for local law 97? I don't see this in the law.
Yes, they have recognized B20, and as I mentioned before, Governor Hochul, signed into law mandating all oil in New York State be B20 blend by 2030.
Okay, and thank you, Jeff. There's one last question from Michael again. Is there any submission required, like a waiver, for buildings with between 1 to 35% stabilized units prior to 2027? Marissa, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. Is there? Go ahead.
Yeah, so for the buildings that are on the 2026 pathway, you won't have to submit anything prior to that. They haven't let us know if there's anything else that you have to go and check off. I would definitely suggest taking a look at the covered building list, making sure that you're on that 2026 pathway building list. If you are, then you should not have to worry until 2026. If you aren't, and you should be, then you will have to reach out to DOB to make sure that you're on the correct list, and that way they are classifying your building the right way. If you're with what in the presentation, there is a link to that covered building list for you to take a look at. But if you have further questions, definitely reach out and I can help you figure out if you're on the right list or not.
Thank you so much, Marissa. Thank
Yeah,
you,
of
Jeff
course.
and John. And thank you, everyone. This has been a very engaging presentation, a lot of good questions. Again, we'll send out the slide deck. We'll send out a copy of the recording. Please follow up with any of the panelists here. We're happy to help. Thank you for taking time out of your day today to spend with us, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.